So this right here is the tiny village of Gjølle, close to Lista. It's right at the southernmost tip of Norway. And 2nd of January this year, an elderly guy who lives in the village, he went out to see what was cast ashore during a recent storm. And on a patch of grass right next to the water's edge, he found a wetsuit. It was gray and black, and he thought it looked cheap. Out of each leg of the wetsuit, there was sticking 2 white bones. It was clearly the remains of a human being. And usually in Norway, dead people are identified quickly. So the police, they started searching through missing reports from the local area, national missing reports, and looked for accidents with a possible connection. They found nothing. So they made a DNA profile, and they started searching internationally through Interpol. Nothing. This was a person that nobody seemed to be missing. It was an invisible life heading for a nameless grave. But then after a month, the police in Norway got a message from the police in the Netherlands. A couple of months earlier, they had found the body in an identical wetsuit, and they had no idea who this person was. But the police in the Netherlands then managed to trace the wetsuit by an RFID chip that was sewn in the suit. So they were then able to tell that both wetsuits are bought by the same customer at the same time, 7th October 2014, in the French city of Calais by the English Channel. But this was all they were able to figure out. The customer paid cash, there was no surveillance footage from the shop. So it became a cold case. We heard this story, and it triggered me and my colleague, photographer Tom Christiansen, and we, of course, had the obvious question. Who were these people? At the time, I'd barely heard about Calais, but it took about 2 or 3 seconds to figure out. Calais is basically known for 2 things. It's the spot in continental Europe closest to Britain, and a lot of migrants and refugees are staying in this camp and are trying desperately to cross over to Britain. And right there was a plausible theory about the identity of the 2 people, and the police made this theory as well. Because if you or I, or anybody else, with a firm connection to Europe, goes missing off the coast of France, people would just know. Your friends or family would report you missing, the police would come search for you, the media would know, and there'd probably be pictures of you on lampposts. It's difficult to disappear without a trace. But if you just fled the war in Syria, and your family, if you have any family left, don't necessarily know where you are, and you're staying here illegally, amongst thousands of others who come and go every day, well, if you disappear one day, nobody will notice. The police won't come search for you because nobody knows you're gone. And this is what happened to Shadi Umar Khataf and Muaz al-Balki from Syria. Me and Tom went to Calais the first time in April this year, and after 3 months of investigation, we were able to tell the story about how these 2 young men fled the war in Syria, ended up stuck in Calais, bought wetsuits, and drowned in what seems to have been an attempt to swim across the English Channel in order to reach England. It is a story about the fact that everybody has a name. Everybody has a story. Everybody is someone. But it is also a story about what it's like to be a refugee in Europe today. So this is where we started our search. This is in Calais. Right now, between 3,500 and 5,000 people are living here under horrible conditions, and it's been dubbed the worst refugee camp in Europe. They have limited access to food, limited access to water, limited access to healthcare, diseases and infections are widespread. And they're all stuck here because they're trying to get to England in order to claim asylum. And they do that by hiding in the back of trucks headed for the ferry or the Eurotunnel, or they sneak inside the tunnel terminal at night to try to hide on the trains. Most want to go to Britain because they know the language, so they figure it'd be easier to restart their lives from there. They want to work, they want to study, they want to be able to continue their lives. A lot of these people are actually highly educated and skilled workers. If you go to Calais and talk to the refugees, you'll meet lawyers, politicians, engineers, graphic designers, farmers, soldiers. You got the whole spectrum. But who all of these people are usually gets lost in the way we talk about refugees and migrants, because we usually do that in statistics. So you have 60 million refugees globally. About 500,000 have made a crossing over the Mediterranean into Europe so far this year, and roughly 4,000 are staying in Calais. But these are numbers. And the numbers don't say anything about who these people are, where they came from, or why they're here. And first I want to tell you about one of them. This is 22-year-old Muaz al-Balki from Syria. We first heard about him after being in Calais the first time, looking for answers to the identity of the 2 dead bodies. And after a while, we heard this story about a Syrian man who was living in Bradford in England and had been desperately searching for his nephew Muaz for months. And it turned out the last time anybody had heard anything from Muaz was the 7th of October 2014. So that was the same date the wetsuits were bought. So we flew over there, and we met the uncle, and we did DNA samples of him. And we later on got additional DNA samples from Muaz's closest relatives, who now lives in Jordan. The analysis concluded the body who was found in a wetsuit on the beach in the Netherlands was actually Muaz al-Balki. And while we were doing all this investigation, we got to know Muaz's story. He was born in the Syrian capital of Damascus in 1991. He was raised in a middle-class family, and his father in the middle there is a chemical engineer who spent 11 years in prison for belonging to the political opposition in Syria. While his father was in prison, Muaz took responsibility and he cared for his 3 sisters. They said he was that kind of guy. Muaz studied to become an electrical engineer at the University of Damascus. So a couple of years into the Syrian war, the family fled Damascus and went to the neighboring country, Jordan. Their father had problems finding work in Jordan, and Muaz could not continue his studies. So he figured, okay, the best thing I can do to help my family would be to go somewhere where I can finish my studies and find work. So he goes to Turkey. In Turkey, he's not accepted at a university. And once he had left Jordan as a refugee, he was not allowed to re-enter. So then he decides to head for the UK, where his uncle lives. He makes it into Algeria, walks into Libya, pays a people smuggler to help him do the crossing into Italy by boat, and from there on he heads to Dunkirk, the city right next to Calais by the English Channel. We know he made at least 12 failed attempts to cross the English Channel by hiding in a truck. But at some point he must have given up all hope. The last night we know he was alive, he spent at a cheap hotel close to the train station in Dunkirk. We found his name in the records, and he seemed to stay there alone. The day after, he went into Calais, entered a sports shop a couple of minutes before 8 o'clock in the evening, along with Shadi Kataf. They both bought wetsuits, and the woman in the shop was the last person we know to have seen them alive. We've tried to figure out where Shadi met Muaz, but we weren't able to do that. But they do have a similar story. We first heard about Shadi after a cousin of his, living in Germany, had read an Arabic translation of the story made of Muaz on Facebook. So we got in touch with him. Shadi, a couple of years older than Muaz, was also raised in Damascus. He was a working kind of guy. He ran a tire repair shop and later worked in a printing company. He lived with his extended family, but their house got bombed early in the war. So the family fled to an area of Damascus known as Camp Yarmouk. Yarmouk is being described as the worst place to live on planet Earth. They've been bombed by the military, they've been besieged, they've been stormed by ISIS, and they've been cut off from supplies for years. There was a UN official who got in last year, and he said they'd ate all the grass till there was no grass left. Out of a population of 150,000, only 18,000 are believed to still be left in Yarmouk. Shadi and his sisters got out. Their parents are still stuck inside. So Shadi and one of his sisters, they fled to Libya. This was after the fall of Gaddafi, but before Libya turned into full-blown civil war. And in this last remaining sort of stability in Libya, Shadi took up scuba diving, and he seemed to spend most of his time underwater. He fell completely in love with the ocean. So when he finally decided that he could no longer be in Libya, late August 2014, he hoped to find work as a diver when he reached Italy. Reality was not that easy. We don't know much about his travels because he had a hard time communicating with his family, but we do know that he struggled. And by the end of September, he was living on the streets somewhere in France. On October 7th, he calls his cousin in Belgium and explains his situation. He said, "I'm in Calais. I need you to come get my backpack and my laptop. I can't afford to pay the people smugglers to help me with the crossing to Britain, but I will go buy a wetsuit and I will swim. His cousin, of course, tried to warn him not to, but Shadi's battery on the phone went flat, and his phone was never switched on again. What was left of Shadi was found nearly 3 months later, 800 kilometers away, in a wetsuit on a beach in Norway. He's still waiting for his funeral in Norway, and none of his family will be able to attend. Many may think that the story about Shadi and Muaz is a story about death, but I don't agree. To me, this is a story about two questions that I think we all share. What is a better life? What am I willing to do to achieve it? And to me, and probably a lot of you, a better life would mean being able to do more of what we think of as meaningful, whether that be spending more time with your family and friends, travel to an exotic place, or just getting money to buy that cool new device or a pair of new sneakers. And this is all within our reach pretty easily. But if you are fleeing a war zone, the answer to those two questions are dramatically different. A better life is a life in safety. It's a life in dignity. A better life means not having your house bombed, not fearing being kidnapped. It means being able to send your children to school, go to university, or just find work to be able to provide for yourself and the ones you love. A better life would be a future of some possibilities compared to nearly none. And that's a strong motivation. And I have no trouble imagining that after spending weeks or even months as a second-grade citizen, living on the streets or in a horrible makeshift camp with a stupid racist name like the jungle, most of us would be willing to do just about anything. If I could ask Shadi and Muaz, the second they stepped into the freezing waters of the English Channel, they would probably say, this is worth the risk, because they could no longer see any other option. And that's desperation, but that's the reality of living as a refugee in Western Europe in 2015. Thank you.
Thank you, Anders. This is Tom Christensen, who took most of the pictures you have seen, and they've done the reporting together. Tom, you two have been back to Calais recently. This was the third trip, was after the publication of the article. What has changed? What have you seen there?
First time we were in Calais, it was about 1,500 refugees there. They had a difficult time, but they were positive, they had hope. The last time, the camp has grown, maybe 4,000 or 5,000 people. Seemed more permanent. NGOs have arrived, a small school have opened. But the thing is that the refugees have stayed for a longer time, and the French government has managed to seal off the borders better. So now the jungle is growing, along with the despair and the hopelessness among the refugees.
With no solution in sight. Are you planning to go back?
Yeah.
And continue the reporting?
Yes.
Anders, I'm a former journalist, and to me it's amazing that in the current climate of slashing budgets and publishers in crisis, Dark Blooded has consented so many resources for this story, which tells a lot about newspapers taking the responsibility. But how did you sell it to your editors?
It wasn't easy at first because we weren't able to know what we actually could figure out. As soon as it became clear that we actually could be able to identify the first one, Muaz, we basically got the message that we could do whatever we wanted. Just travel wherever we need to go, do whatever you need to do, just get this done, some sort of. Yeah.
That's an editor taking responsibility. The story, by the way, has been translated and published across several European countries, and certainly will continue to do, and we're going to read the updates from you. Thank you, Anders.
Thank you,
Thank you, Tom.